Hi, everyone. Welcome to e-learning, Sociology 101. We're going to focus on Chapter 11 today, which is on race and ethnicity. I'm just going to hit the highlights. This isn't going to be what would be an in-class full lecture. So the first thing I want us to be able to do is to differentiate between ethnicity and race, right? So when you're outside of the classroom, people use those words interchangeably in conversation. In a sociology class, we do not. So ethnicity, if you wouldn't mind writing this down somewhere, ethnicity is the perception of a shared heritage, right? The perception of a shared heritage. And what that means is people have a sense of history, a sense of how families work, a sense of what the government should be, hygiene, music, dance, all those kinds of things fall under the umbrella of ethnicity. Race, on the other hand, and again, this is something I want you to write down, race is a social construct. So what that means is we as a society, we as people have decided that skin color, facial features, hair texture, we have decided that those sorts of things are more important than they are biologically, right? And so when we talk about skin differences, facial features, we're talking about race, right? So again, I want you to understand the difference between the two. So there are some ethnicities, people from Puerto Rico, for example, who come from multiple races, right? So people from Puerto Rico have Hispanic heritage, they have African heritage, they have European heritage, they have Native American heritage. That's multiple races, right? So Puerto Ricans are an ethnicity. They're probably one of our better examples of that. So I want you to understand the difference between the two. Racism, right? We hear this one all the time. It's in the news a lot. We see it happen. So racism is prejudice based on those characteristics that we talked about just a couple minutes ago with, skin color, facial features. So oftentimes, if not all the time, racists believe that their particular race is superior to all of the others, right? And so they have all kinds of stereotypes that they use. These aren't helpful, right? I mean, it's difficult to have conversations with people when they have those sort of feelings. Institutional racism is are policies that are promoted within an organization, within a government, within a company. Maybe one of the better examples that we have in Palatine was about 20 years ago. We had a realtor in the northwest suburbs who was busted, and what they were arrested for was when you're selling a home, you're the one who pays both realtors, right? That's the way the process works. And so the realtor for the seller had an under the table agreement that they would only bring people to look at the home who were white, right? So they didn't bring anyone else. 20 years ago, you didn't have Zillow, where you and I can just go online to Zillow.com and take a look at homes that are available. Back then, we were completely reliant on the realtor to tell us what homes were available in our price range. Maybe a second good local example, this is probably closer to 15 years ago, is a local company, a local employer. This is before all of you all, when you're searching for a job, you go online, right? You fill out an application online, you load it, you email it, whatever that process is. In the olden days, right, we filled out hard copy applications. And so what this particular company did is if a minority came in, they would underline the name. They would boldly underline the name. And so that was an indication to the hiring manager that, hey, this person is a minority. That one went into the trash can, right? So they finally, and you know how this stuff works, someone was let go from the company who knew what the process was, and the first thing they did was call EEOC or police or whomever. So that's That's another example here. So I'm on the page about psychological interpretations of prejudice and discrimination, and I really want to talk about scapegoating. And so oftentimes what precedes racism is scapegoating. And so what scapegoating is we blame others, fill in the blank. We say things, we may say things like, well, I would go to Stanford if I were fill in the blank, right? Or this company would have hired me if I were fill in the blank. That's scapegoating, right? I mean, that's instead of, it's a lot more difficult to look inward and identify our own issues and our own shortcomings and things that we need to improve. It's a lot easier to look at somebody else and say, it's not my fault, it's their fault, right? So that's exactly what scapegoating is. On the exam, however we do the exam, on the exam, I'm going to ask you to differentiate between prejudice and discrimination, right? I have a real simple, I think simple, way of thinking about it. So prejudice is what we think. Discrimination is what we do, right? Prejudice is what we think. Discrimination is what we do. That's really the difference between the two, right? So someone may have prejudicial thoughts, but they try to hide it, and so they may restrict some of their actions. However, someone who discriminates does not restrict their actions, right? So they take their prejudicial thoughts, their stereotypical thoughts, and they put those forward in a bad way. Why has racism flourished? Boy, there's a million reasons for this. Many countries in Europe went around the globe conquering other groups, right? I mean, Spain had a big hand in this. I mean, that's one of the reasons that most Central and Southern and South American countries speak Spanish, right? Great Britain went around, and India, Canada is still part of the Commonwealth for Great Britain. So we've seen a lot of this. That's part of it. And then we've also seen with racism, right? We've also seen, which we talked about in our chapter on stratification, we've seen slavery, right? And so once people are considered property and are bought and sold, then that's going to, and we're seeing it with our own country, within our own country, that has a lasting impact, right? And so we're still dealing in the 2000s with issues that went on for hundreds of years. On the page that has to do with ethnic relations, so we have assimilation, melting pot, pluralism, and multiculturalism. I want you to focus on 3 of the 4. So first of all, I want you to know what assimilation means. Assimilation means that the immigrant group, the new group, forsakes their previous culture from the country they came from. They forsake their previous culture and they adopt the new culture, right? And so I think most people who have practiced assimilation do it Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, right? They do it when they're at work, but when they go home, they're still going to practice, their religious rituals, celebrate their religious holidays, eat the food that they're used to, right? Those sorts of things. So another example of assimilation, and this is one that we actually see too often. I know I've brought this up before, but just as a reminder, so some people will say something like, well, if you're going to be in this country, you need, and I love it when they say it this way, you need to speak American, right? Like there's some American language. But when someone is saying that if you're going to be in this country, you need to speak English, then you are demanding that someone assimilate, right? I mean, the next generation of the group that's coming in, trust me, think about how many bilingual students we have in our class. The next generation is going to speak English, right? 2 generations from now, they're probably only going to speak English. So I think I've said before, the Daily Herald, when it started, so 150 years ago, whatever the time frame is, When the Daily Herald started as a local newspaper for the suburbs, it was published in two languages, right? It was published in English, of course, and German. And the reason it was German was just look at the names of the town, Schaumburg, for example. Most immigrants in the northwest suburbs back then were from Germany. And, people didn't have an issue per se with it being published in two languages back then, because an awful lot of the people who moved here were of German descent. So today the Daily Herald also publishes Reflejos, which you see in the hallways at Harper College. Reflejos is an educational, I think it's a weekly, it might be a month, but anyway, Reflejos is an educational newspaper. That's one of their versions, which is for the same story, they'll do one column in English and one column in Spanish, right? So that's so the Daily Herald continues with what they did 150 years ago, and that is to publish things in two different languages. It just so happens that today it's Spanish. 100 years from now, when we're not around anymore, maybe you will be. I'm not going to be here 100 years from now, but it may very well be another language that people are focusing on. Melting pot. When I was a kid, melting pot is what we talked a lot about in terms of how immigrants fit into the new society. So the idea was, and this came from University of Chicago, if you're looking for a local tie, the idea was you would have this large cauldron, right? And so you mix it up and you take all these races and you throw them in there and you just mix this thing together. And whatever you end up with color-wise is that's the merging of the cultures, right? So today we think a little more pluralistically, right? And so today, I don't know why in the world we think we need to use food as an example, but people say, well, today it's more like a salad, right? So when groups come to the U.S., they retain elements of their history, of their ethnicity. And so those elements are the different colors in a salad, right? So even though it's blended together, different groups continue to retain some of those characteristics. Okay? All right. All right. I have a trick for this one, but I want you to be able to differentiate between immigration and emigration, right? So immigration with an I are people coming into the country, right? So when new people are coming in, there are changes. Emigration is people leaving a country to go to another one. So emigration with an E, I think exit, right? So immigration is in, immigration is exit or out. When immigration and emigration occur, you have changes in both places, right? So where people leave from, there's going to be changes. And then where people go to, there's going to be changes. So it's important when we talk about global migration, it's important that we talk about both and we have an understanding of the impact of both people leaving and of people coming in. Again, I'm just hitting the highlights. Yeah, let's skip over that. So you have a chart, table 11.1, which is in one of the overheads. Lost my mind for a second there. It's just kind of interesting to see the percent of the population in different groups, what their percentages are. So African Americans in this country, a little bit under 13%, Native Americans combined with Alaskan Natives, less than 1%, Asians are a little under 5%, right? And then when we get to Hispanic and Latino, we're talking a little closer to 15%. Where's the one I wanted to focus on? Oh, I don't see it. I'm looking right at it and I don't see it. No, I don't see it. So we'll talk about it at another time. Okay, so that's just an example of the groups that we have right now. In this chapter, we're going to end by talking about race and gender. At the end of the next chapter, which is on gender issues, chapter 12, or anyway, the next chapter, chapter 12, we're going to end up having the same conversation, just reversed. So one of the things that we've seen with race is minority women for the longest time have had to hold multiple jobs, often raise children or rear children in a single parent household. And we've talked a lot about, particularly in our chapters on stratification, how difficult that is, how difficult it is to keep a job and manage a child when they're sick, right? So just think of the crazy stuff we're going through right now, right? We're all sort of forced to stay at home. So, and a lot of those people are unemployed right now, right? So if you work for a restaurant or a hotel, or there's a pretty good chance you're not working, or retail, right? So there's an awful lot of, what was it last week? 3.3 million people were either laid off or furloughed over the past couple of weeks. So it's just been absolutely crazy. So when we talk about gender and race, the piece that I want you to focus on is not all women have the same experience, right? And so what we mean by that, and this probably started before the time frame I'm going to give you, but at least 20 years ago, when I became aware of it, we started to see minority women say, wait a second, maybe our experiences are different, right? So the stay-at-home mom who has a nanny, wouldn't that be nice, who lives in one of our richer suburbs and meets her girlfriends for coffee on a daily basis, that's one life, right? Someone else who's working 3 jobs to continue to pay the rent, to try to find a way to help their child learn and to keep buying them shoes because kids' feet just continue to grow no matter what you feed them. Those are probably 2 different kinds of lives, right? And so one of the things we've seen a lot more of over the last several years is we've seen more of a focus on minority women maybe having some different lives than many other women. So that's a really brief look at our chapter on ethnicity and race. Shoot me an email if you have any questions, and I will post chapter 12 shortly. You have a tremendous day.